Okay, we're sort of at the end of the stream, but I did promise Mr. Skadoosh a game, so this will be the last game of the stream. And we're off with e4. Let's go for some e5 stuff, and let's just go for something exciting to end the stream. A Petrov defense. He goes bishop to c4. It's a little bit unusual. What happens if I take your pawn, sir? And now I go d5. So he's playing instant chess, which is always scary. Can I go knight c6? Seems reasonable to me. He could go d3 there, but doesn't seem so scary to deal with d3. In that case, I could maybe scoop up this bishop and give him this knight in exchange. Or I could do something else. I could, for example, against d3, I could just drop the knight back. He can take me, queen takes, and then just bishop e7. Once he moves the bishop, then I castle, and I've given back the pawn, but my position should be pretty solid. This is the so-called Urusov Gambit, is it? There's another Urusov, isn't it? That isn't this. Or is this the... Oh, no, maybe this is the only Urusov. I looked at the Urusov before, but I was not recognizing it as that. So here, what do I do? Can I take this guy? Mr. Skadoosh tells me he's out of book after queen e2. That's what I like to hear, Mr. Skadoosh. I'll actually, in case he's not listening in the chat, I will say... I will type it to him. Okay. So d takes c4, very interesting here. Because if he goes d takes e4, yeah, okay, let's grab the bishop. I think that's just a bishop pair. I think is nice in this position. And now I'd like to go bishop e6. Small bit bothered by knight g5. But is that such a big deal? I can always move the queen and defend the bishop. I also might have some knight d4 ideas. In fact, knight d4 looks quite tempting because I hit his queen. So after knight g5, knight d4, I hit his queen and I force him to move to a square where he won't be attacking my c-pawn. My strategy right now is to try and to hang on to my extra pawn. And I figure that even if I don't manage to hang on to my extra pawn, that at least I have the bishop pair. So what's the worst that could happen? I mean, the worst that could happen for me, apart from a blunder, is that he would go, let's say, knight g5. I would go here. He would take, something like this. And that then he would win this pawn. But even if he does all of that, the position should be about equal. So I think that my position is much better here because I don't think he can do all of that without me posing some problems for him. For example, if he goes knight g5, he has to contend with the possibility of knight d4. And if he goes, let's say, here, takes, and then knight d2, then knight d4 was also a very strong idea. If he plays like this, I have b5, and I, for now, am hanging on to the pawn. Thank you for the game, Vijay. I was analyzing just the king and pawn endgame, actually. So that was sort of the extent of the analysis. I didn't analyze the whole game just because of time constraints. Okay, so here we're just playing a strategy of trying to hang on to the pawn. And now the opponent plays knight f1, and I think this is maybe not so strong. It makes a lot of sense to put the knight on e3, but little by little, black is hanging on to that extra pawn, and that is much more significant to factor than the bishop pair. The bishop pair here is not that powerful because there's not so many open lines. The knights are quite good in these kind of close positions. So I wouldn't say that having the bishop pair is a major asset, but having this extra pawn I think is a reasonably healthy extra pawn. So in the long term, 4 against 3 here on the queen side could give him a lot of problems. Knight d4 is an interesting idea. If pawn takes, rook takes d4, there's bishop takes h2. But I feel like I just want to castle, something like that, you know, just play a safe move. So he goes knight g3. He's just maneuvering to decent squares. It makes a lot of sense. And now I have to decide what I'm going to do against knight f5. I could try and just put a stop to it with g6, but that does weaken my dark squares and it would invite moves like bishop h6. So I would prefer to avoid that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put my rook on e8 for now. And the logic there is that at some point he's probably going to jump onto f5. If he does, I might give up my bishop because the knight is a very strong piece. And when he takes, I'll have options like e4 with my rook here supporting the pawn. And even moves like knight d4, because then, let's say that this has all been exchanged over here, and he then takes, then I can take here, and I would have this, this point that I'm suddenly hitting his queen. So he goes knight g5 instead, which is really logical. And I think it's a pretty strong move because the idea is queen h5 here is coming in. So what to do? Well, I'm going to go knight to d4. I'm going to start with this move. And I'm going to sort of say to him that he has to either play a move like queen d2 in order to maintain the defense of the c2 pawn, or commit to this idea with a kingside attack. And if he commits to the idea of a kingside attack, I'm going to play h6. I'm expecting knight takes e6, and then just rook takes e6. And my thinking is that the rook here from e6 should be able to handle the attack. And at the same time, so that's the line we're going to see. And then on the other hand, my knight on d4 creates a threat here on c2, and he's going to have to deal with this threat. And so if he goes, let's say knight takes, rook takes, and then he deals with the threat by playing c3, I might have the move knight b3, and then after knight b3 he has to move the rook, and then I can even maybe take this bishop. So that's actually what we are seeing in the game. I can potentially take this bishop, and then there's not much of an attacking possibilities here. And I also can sort of do something like take here and then put my queen on g5 and sort of kick his queen back. That's one possibility. The other option that I have if he goes rook b1 is to just grab this pawn. It splits up my structure, which is not ideal. But on the other hand, you know, I do go 2 pawns up in that case. I think the biggest problem that I see in this line is that he can go back to e2 and he can hit this pawn on c4. So I don't think I was going to take it. But he got scared, I think, of losing this pawn. And so he's gone rook a2. And now I really want to keep my knight here and my bishop here because the rook is completely passive on this square. The only problem is I need to find a move. If I'm not going to take this guy, I need to find a move. Taking actually is kind of attractive from the point of view of playing rook takes and then bishop c5, maybe, and getting my bishop to a really good square and threatening some queen d2 stuff. The rook will at some point go back, which is a bit annoying, but on the other hand, the rook here is not so stupid because at any moment he can take here, and then if I take back, he'll be able to get rid of it. And if I go c6 and he takes, the rook even from a2 will still be pressing this pawn. It will be kind of weak, but the problem that I have with a move like c6 is I'm a bit concerned that after knight f5, he starts to have some pressure against my bishop on my bishop here. my bishop on d6. And if, let's say, I don't know, I get something like this, I go queen f8, maybe, you know, he can take, and at some point, I don't know. I guess I'm not really seeing any major attack there. I could definitely go some kind of route like that. Yeah, I think it makes some sense to play c6. But knight takes c1, rook takes, and then putting that bishop, such a strong bishop, on c5, and then also not having to worry about attacks is also really very attractive idea. So I'm actually gonna go for that. I think it's a really interesting moment of the game. Maybe it was better to play passively, or not play passively, play c6 and play against this permanent problem. But playing like this and suddenly improving my bishop, improving my queen, creating concrete threats, and eliminating the possibility, taking the punch out of his attacking possibilities, makes a lot of sense to me. Also, this rook on e6 will get recycled via the d file, I think, in the near future. So yeah, this is very interesting. I'd like to know what was the better move. I might take a look at that at some point. Probably not on stream. I think that once this game finishes, sort of that'll be that for today's stream. Queen d2 ideas are definitely attractive here, because then I keep this rook tied down. I don't want to go rook d6 immediately because the e5 pawn is falling. So queen d2 looks good to me. He has the move b4, but I can take, and he can take this bishop, but it's an exchange for me. If he goes rook here, I'll just take the pawn. And as I say, with this bishop on the board, I'd be very wary to leave, to go sort of, oh no, whoops, I totally forgot. My rook actually, I was too relaxed once again, and my rook actually was in trouble there. My rook was being defended by my queen, and I completely forgot about that. So that's a little bit of a blunder there. Pretty significant one. And now I just have to be careful. I still think my position is fine, but it's not what it was just one move prior. Queen is a little bit annoying here. So what I should have done, by the way, here is just, I don't know, maybe even some rook move, or maybe just rook here, rook to b8, something like that. Queen d2 was just a big blunder. It does happen. Okay, so let's go a5. Yeah, we can go a5 here, and then I'll probably just put the bishop on b6, defend the pawn, and that's kind of a healthier setup, I think, for me. Can I take this guy? Now I'm a bit worried, right? Because I've blundered before, just a short while ago. So sometimes you're lacking a little bit in confidence after you blunder. But like the problem that I have with taking here is that I still won't be able to take here because of this pawn on f7 is hanging. It opens up some files for him, and it's a little bit scary for me. Whereas if I just go bishop here, maybe the position is actually just a lot easier to play if I put the bishop here. Because now, if he wants to avoid, like let's say that he doesn't want me to ever be able to take here, he might play something like f3. But then his queen is suddenly cut off a bit from the action, his dark squares are very weak, everything is under control, and after bishop b6, I'm ready to start developing my rook. He plays a very natural move here, inviting g6, but that doesn't do much. First of all, queen here, and secondly, he can actually just take this pawn. So I don't want that. What is his threat? I guess he wants queen g4, but queen g4 shouldn't create any real threats. After queen g4, I can always just go queen g5. I don't want to meet queen g4 with rook g6 because of knight e7 check. But after queen g4, I could also meet it with g6. Yeah, g6 would also be fine to me. Looks quite good actually to meet it with g6, and then his attack ends. Whereas if I go queen g4, queen g5, I'm offering him the exchange of queens. And then without my queen on the board, he might have some rook a4 stuff harassing this pawn. So instead he takes this approach, he goes queen there. But my question is, can I actually take the pawn now? The point is, if he takes everything, I have a back rank mate idea. And if he goes here, I also have back rank mate. And if he goes anywhere else, yeah, okay, I'm going to take it. Why not? I mean, to take the pawn with tempo is very attractive. He can go queen g4, but I'll go maybe g6 anyway. But if he goes queen g4, g6, now I'm dropping this pawn. So I probably shouldn't have done what I did. Queen g5 is another option. Takes, and again he'll take here. Then I could go rook d2, or I could go g6. And I'm not so happy with what I've done here. I think I had a plan of not taking the pawn, and then I went ahead and I took it. And I'm slightly regretting that. Okay, let's go g6. And maybe I have just a really shameless idea. If he takes my pawn, I'll go h5, and then his queen actually won't have a square, and then I'll just take his knight, even if my position will collapse slightly. Okay, what do I do here? Actually, I have very little time. That's maybe the most important point of all. Let's take this guy. But again, why did I take this? I think I should just drop back. I'm playing this game very poorly, actually. Let's go queen here. I want rook d1. I guess his best move is probably rook a1, but then I could take this guy. But I don't like how I've handled this position. I handled it very, very poorly. And especially I don't like my time management. I went from a position of just being so much better to completely butchering it. Rook d1, he might go rook a1, then I could take, and take this guy, or I could just swap everything here and go rook b5. I'm gonna just make a pragmatic decision because I don't have so much time on the clock. I think it's better to play rook takes a1, but I prefer to take the queens off the board and go rook b6. And in the end, I'm definitely winning this pawn on b5. And so in the end, it's going to be 7 pawns against 5. And I think that it should be a winning rook and pawn endgame. Here I can take on b2. He cannot take because of the threat of mate. And now it's actually, I think if he does something... Okay, so he misses the checkmate. So he played great actually during the middle game stage. Outplayed me. I think I outplayed him in the opening. He outplayed me in the middle game. But then towards the end, thankfully for me, as I got low on time, he made some significant mistakes. But I'm not happy at all. I felt that prior to my mistake of queen d2, here in this position, felt, my position is quite good. You can see it's about minus 2.5, so it's a very big advantage. And as I said, rook d8 here makes a lot of sense. But I go queen d2, and you can see that most of my advantage is gone. After a takes b5, I had to sort of pivot and play this a5 move, but here, yeah, it's interesting. King h1 was a good idea. It turns out after bishop takes, I had missed queen f3, rook f6, and knight f5 with some kind of messiness. So I think my intuition was right to drop the bishop back to b6, or at least to not take the pawn. I think this is apparently a bit inaccurate. And then here, again, looks fine, but already I should have stuck with that initial plan of not capturing on f2. When I take here, suddenly the game gets a bit messy. And after g6, actually, if he had found the very clever rook aa1 with the threat of rook d1, suddenly I think I would have been in some trouble. I was saying that I could go h5 and try and nab this knight, but the problem here is that my bishop is under fire. And if I go something like bishop b6, I would actually be lost after rook here, queen here, and let's say check first. And the point is, if I take, he's going to take me here first and take me here with mate. And if I go here, he'll go takes. And I would have been the one losing. So here I would have had to bail out with some move like queen f4, something like some endgame like this. And in the end, such an endgame as this is, as it says, it's roughly equal. At the moment, we have level pawns. My structure looks utterly horrific, but the fact that he has the back rank problems and his pawns here are so loose, and this guy is a backward pawn, means that it'll all fizzle out. So something like this takes here. You can see that not all rook and pawn endgames are drawn, but this one is. So something like that with a draw. So very strong viewers indeed overall. I think it was some exciting games, interesting games. I would say more than exciting, I would say extremely instructive games. I felt some very interesting king and pawn end games and other decisions. So I hope you guys have enjoyed today's stream.